Good morning and welcome to Business Live Middle East webinar on business continuity during COVID-19, powered by Al Free Trade Zone Authority. The world is going through an unprecedented crisis owed to the coronavirus pandemic, and companies and institutions are looking for solutions in these uncertain times. We have a power-packed panel of speakers today who will help us negotiate these turbulent times better. Starting with Mr. Sunny Zulu. Mr. Zulu is the head and managing director of retail banking business at Standard Chartered Bank UAE. He is responsible for driving wealth management, retail products, distribution, and branch banking across priority, premium, personal, and Islamic segments. Our second panelist, Mr. Sami Mahdi from the UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority. Mr. Sami is currently a Senior Business Development Executive in UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority. He joined the UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority as one of its first employees after the restructuring initiative by the government of UAE. His experience in business development, along with his qualification in law, has been a key factor in assisting the growth of the free zone to its present status. Mr. Mahdi is also involved in marketing as well as inviting foreign direct investments into the free zone from various parts of the world. Our third panelist, Mr. Shiraz Sethi, the Regional Managing Partner of DWF Middle East LLP and the co-head of the employment team. He handles the labor matter of the various free zones in UAE, including DIFC and ADGM. He is also ranked in chambers as someone who delivers advice in a simple, fast, and effective way and has been recognized in Legal 500. Mr. Sethi has authored the commentary of the DIFC employment law and was part of the executive committee which drafted the key legislative changes to the DIFC employment law. Ms. Latley Jones, an experienced senior associate who joined Al-Tamimi & Company's employment in 2012. She advises clients throughout the UAE, onshore and in the free zones, concerning all aspects of UAE employment, law compliance from the onboarding process, day-to-day management of employees, advising on termination and post-termination issues. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us today. Before I begin the discussion, I would like to inform all that the audience is free to pose questions during the webinar, which will be answered towards the end of the session. You can use the Q&A icon displayed on your screen to type in your questions or onto the Q&A dashboard. Kindly mention your name, designation, or whether you would like any specific speaker to address your question. Lastly, the audience also has the option to raise hand feature, an icon that appears below, and I'll come back to you during the webinar to take your questions. Let's get started. Ms. Jones will now provide us with guidance for employers in UAE during the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you for the introduction, Poonam. And good morning, everyone. As Poonam mentioned, I've been asked to set the scene this morning regarding the situation for employers in the UAE at the moment. And I think as most employers will be aware, and obviously employees are also aware at this point, there are and have been a number of resolutions that have been issued by the authorities, both in relation to movement and restrictions on movement generally to protect the public overall, and also specifically in relation to the employment of individuals in the UAE. So there is a lot of information out there, but I think the most important matter at this point relates to one particular resolution, which I'll come on to shortly. I think as a starting point, it's worth mentioning that most employers in the UAE, specifically outside of the DIFC and ADGM free zones, will already be familiar with the application of the UAE labour law. The labour law continues to apply in full. There is to date, there has been no change in the labour law insofar as the current global pandemic is concerned. So it's still very important to be conscious all the time of the provisions of the labour law. There have not been any changes with regard to valid reasons for termination, with regard to working hours, etc., other than as provided in the resolution, which strictly speaking sits alongside the labour law rather than amending it. So in terms of the resolution that I mentioned, we're talking about Ministerial Resolution number 279 of 2020. That was issued to a lot of fanfare towards the end of March. It came into force on the 26th of March and is still in force as we speak. It sets out, it's quite a short resolution, but it sets out a number of measures which are intended to give guidance to employers in terms of how to deal with employment issues given the global pandemic. There will be discussions, I know, later in this session regarding particular issues around the resolution and how they should be dealt with by employers. But to give an overview, very broadly, the resolution introduces a number of concepts that to date have not been recognised in law by the UAE authorities. So, for example, the measures that are set out in the resolution include remote working, which, as I said, to date has not been recognised, unpaid leave, and it also covers things like reduction in salary for short-term and longer-term, and potentially redundancy. Now, I say redundancy with some degree of hesitation, just because the resolution does not specifically say that it recognises redundancy, albeit that there are provisions that effectively relate to redundancy. And again, I'll come on to that very shortly. It's also important to note that the measures that are set out in the resolution are not, it's not permissible for employers to enforce them unilaterally necessarily. So in that way, the provisions of the labour law continue to apply. It's still important to have employee buy-in when you, as an employer, make changes to the employment relationship. And we still need, in most cases, employee consent to introduce certain measures. The resolution also provides that the measures set out within the body of the resolution should be implemented gradually. So ideally, one measure, excuse me, and then if that doesn't work, the second, and then on to the third, etc. It's not clear how that's going to work in practice. And for some employers, clearly one of the measures will be more attractive than the other, the others for whatever reason. And again, it's not clear what will happen if employers decide to skip past one and go to another, or react in a different order to that set out in the resolution. So that remains to be seen. I think possibly the most important change brought about by the resolution is, as I touched upon earlier, the apparent recognition of the concept of redundancy. Again, the resolution does not specifically say redundancy or reduction in workforce. Instead, it contains a provision that basically says certain measures should be introduced if an employer finds itself with a surplus of employees, pursuant to which it is required to make dismiss employees. So again, it does not talk about redundancy, but ultimately a surplus of employees is effectively a redundancy situation. And the resolution does provide for some guidance where a redundancy situation effectively arises. In particular, the resolution provides for a virtual job market, which the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation has in place now. And that allows employers who are in the unfortunate position where they're required to make redundancies to go on and upload the employee's details, of course, with the employee's consent. And that makes the employee searchable where other employers are looking for employees with a similar skill set. That's a pretty new thing, and it's interesting for the circumstances, and obviously good news for employees as well as employers. Separately, and I think this is probably the most important change, and certainly the one we are getting asked questions about most, where employees are made redundant, the resolution provides that certain additional payments are required. Ordinarily, where an employee is terminated, all employment benefits, salary, allowances, etc., will generally cease at the date of termination. As it stands now, pursuant to the resolution, and again for employers that come under the remit of the resolution, it's now the case that employees will be dismissed. And given that their visas cannot be cancelled at this point, or there's some difficulty with that, and given the situation, employers continue to be responsible for certain benefits post-termination. Again, that represents a very big change in the law as we know it. And there's some confusion around what exactly is included, but generally, I think the consensus is that all amounts continue to be payable to the employees with the exception of their salary. So that's a big deal, just because ordinarily redundancy might be considered by employers as providing a real cost-saving option. Clearly now that isn't necessarily the case, and any additional payments to be made to employees are to continue either until the employee is able to leave the UAE, or they find alternative employment and are therefore sponsored by the new employer, or until such time as the resolution is retracted. Now, clearly that's unlikely to happen anytime soon, and is more likely to happen once the pandemic is over. And clearly then there's no guidance as to when that would be. So this really could have big implications for employers in terms of their cost saving and in terms of looking at what measures might be taken in relation to employees at any time. Again, that represents a real shift in what we are used to, but it does not mean that there is a change to the labour law, and I think that's probably the most important takeaway point at this stage. So as it stands at the moment, the labour law is still in place and still applies to all employer and employee relationships onshore, with certain exceptions. And so employers will still have to have regard to the provisions of the labour law in relation to any steps taken. Of course, it also is now the case that the resolution provides some additional colour, and again will have to be considered in the context of any cost-saving measures. And again, I know that more discussion is going to happen around that shortly. So without further ado, I'll pass you back to Poonam to lead the next discussion.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for your insights. You know, these are some insights which will be very helpful for the employers, especially the last one which you have mentioned, that in spite of the redundancy, people employers still have to pay all the benefits till the time, employees find another job or all. So which none of us are aware of it. So thanks a lot for sharing these insights with us. As you all are aware, all the countries around the world are ramping up fiscal measures and financial aid programs to the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The United Arab Emirates has been upfront with regards to helping revive its businesses during these tough times. Right from announcing stimulus packages to slashing fees for various business activities, the country is doing it all, as Natalie has also mentioned. That's a great step, in ensuring a very positive message to the economy. We would now like to invite Mr. Sunny Zulu to give us insights on financial planning during this worldwide pandemic. Sunny, welcome on board.
Thank you very much, Madam.
Sunny, we have, when we talk about financial planning, there are a lot of questions employees, employers, working people, they have in their mind at this stage, especially, when they're working from home, when we all have been asked to go on, our annual leaves or unpaid leaves. So I'll start my discussion from the government perspective. Is there anything that the government has put in place for banks to support customers in the form of relief during this time?
Yes, of course. So there's a lot that has been done, and the government, through the central bank and the leadership of the central bank, they have been able to roll out the targeted economic support scheme. The first version was issued on the 18th of March, which was since revised on the 16th of April. So this scheme, it's made to facilitate a payment holiday, so clients can be able to defer the payment of their principal and or interest or profit during the period of the scheme. And for all clients that have been, or consumers that have been impacted by COVID-19, whether it's SMEs or the private sector, corporates or individuals, can all be able to benefit from this scheme.
Apart from the central bank-led initiative, is there anything else that the banks are doing to revive relief to the customers?
There's quite a lot that the banks have done. So all the banks, first of all, they've been able to, look at this initiative from the central bank and implementing that. But over and above that, most of the banks have introduced or announced various initiatives, including the reduction of fees. They have reduced even the markups, in some cases, zeroized the markups on FX rates. We have seen also a number of banks reaching out to their clients, because at a time like this one, you do not only look at managing the risk portfolio, but you also look at enabling clients and also being able to grow, because some of the clients, they did not have enough cash flow to keep them going, working capital, because even as we speak, a lot of turnovers have gone down and companies, they need cash. So in some cases, those are credit limits that have been enhanced to ensure that during this period when there's no income coming, the consumers and the businesses are able to be assisted for a period of 3 months, 6 months, and it's different from bank to bank.
So in these times when, when we see a lot of financial fluctuations across the world at this time, so what would you suggest? Is it good to invest, or is this the time to wait and see?
Well, that's a very, very good question. So I would actually say it depends on which asset classes that the client is looking at, and also how diversified the current portfolios are. There are some assets that might be very, very attractive today. So as you know, we saw, the stock market, the equity market, coming down significantly, in some cases coming down over 30%. Now, if, that stock is available today, and you can be able to invest at 30%, down compared to where the normal trading price was, this would be a very good time to invest. But it also depends on, are you investing, for the long term, or are you looking for short-term gains? And if you're looking for the long term, definitely this is the right time to be able to go in. But it also, like I said, you look at the different asset classes. There is, even when you come in to look at the property market as well, that's another interesting area where we are seeing a lot of changes and developments happening. So the best advice that I would give is, for each and every individual or company, is to have a very good investments advisor, be able to share. We know we've got different kinds of investors. We've got those that are savvy investors. They're able to make decisions on their own. They're able to read the market. And we've got also investors that will need to get a lot of advice from financial experts. And there are a lot of resources today that you can be able to tap in for advice.
I agree with you, but there is a lot of, I would say, speculation. There's a lot of insecurities when we are talking about, with your 30% portfolio going down and all. And there have been, there are some billionaires who have suddenly become millionaires, from billionaire to millionaire. So that is also one of the biggest, worry. In such cases, how can individuals and businesses, protect themselves from such events in the future?
Right. So, like you rightly said, right, these events, they will tend to happen, and experts have looked at the pattern, and in some cases, there are certain events that repeat themselves after 10 years, others after 30 years, after 50 years, and so on. I'm not so sure whether that pattern would continue in future. It might be broken. It might be a different pattern. But having that foresight becomes very, very important, and for every individual and every business to be able to prepare ourselves. And there are various ways of doing that. One of them that is always available is insurance. We know that even during this time, there some companies that, businesses that insure themselves against such pandemics. And today they're able to claim on that. There's, a lot of option, even when it comes to insuring yourself against redundancy, against, a pay cut. And there's so many various options out there. It's very, very important to focus on that. But it also, about how you have diversified your portfolio, because if you put all your eggs, in one basket, then there's a very big risk there that when you have an incident like this one, and it so happens that that particular asset is highly impacted, then you have got very few options. So having a diversified portfolio is very, 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 very important. And we continue to emphasize on that. And even if you are a very savvy investor, and your risk profile, allows you to invest in, high risk, high return assets, it's also very important to put some of your investment in the low risk, low returns. And having that diversified portfolio becomes very, very healthy. But also, it's very important to look at, how you have built your business continuity plans, because these kind of events will happen. How ready are you for a disruption? And I must mention that even during this period, we have seen that a lot of companies and even small businesses had a very big challenge to be able to adapt or even to continue. There are some businesses today, as we speak, that are actually running, and they are running remotely, and they have invoked their BCPs, and they're operating. And there are some businesses that completely cannot. They don't even have an alternative way of being able to serve their clients. Everything has come to a standstill. And unfortunately, when something like this happens, you don't even have suppliers. So even when you want to have, to enable those alternative channels, but because everybody else is closed and it's taking so long, it becomes very, very difficult. So it's important to always be ready and to be able to build your business in a very nimble way that you can be able to adapt to changes as they come.
Quite interesting. Because of the expo happening this year, we were quite optimistic about the property market. And now with this pandemics, we really don't know what's happening. So we would like to have, your insights on exactly, because property market has been one of the key revenue drivers for the Dubai economy. And suddenly, no one is even talking about property market. There's no news about it and all. So what's happening in the property market?
That's a very interesting one, Panam. Very, very interesting. And we have seen that, especially at the beginning of the year, I would say, probably even towards the end of last year, coming into this year, the property market was really, booming in terms of the number of units that were being sold. The numbers had just gone up significantly, and month on month, we saw that continuing to happen. And that was driven by a number of things, right? The price was coming down, and because the price was coming down, then it became attractive to be able to buy for self-use or even for investment. However, in the last month, we have seen a significant slowdown, and mostly it has been because of the challenges in processing. We do not have valuers who can be able to go out and do valuations. The transfer of property today, and even especially when you are not, it's not a handover property. As a buyer, you need to go and see the property. You need to go and see maybe 4, 5, 6, or even more before you make a decision. And because of the restrictions on movement, that has slowed down. The handovers, however, those, because there were already agreements, and we are still seeing units being sold, though much, much slower. However, in terms of the pricing, there are a few things that are at play at the moment. We have seen the rentals and the rental yields dropping significantly. So for a number of people that are renting, their rental costs has come down. And that also is getting customers to be able to get into a wait situation, because they're saying, if my rental cost has come down, why should I buy an expensive property today and begin to pay, for that mortgage, or even take away my cash flow. On the other side, we have seen also that because of the changes around the expo, the number of developers have slowed down the constructions, because they were all trying to meet a certain target, and that is now moving. Therefore, they've been able to slow down. So a few things that have happened. The rental costs has come down faster than the drop in property prices. They're waiting because clients are waiting. We expect to see that the property prices will fall down even further. Additionally, because the interest rates have come down, customers can now be able to access funding at a cheaper cost. And as they're accessing the funding and they're waiting for the property prices to come down even further, within the next 6, 7, 8 months, we should now begin to see that people will begin to invest and begin to buy property very, very soon.
So what would you suggest? Is this the right time to invest, or should we wait?
That's a good question. If you find a good offer today, I would say please go ahead and get it, because there are a lot of people that, some of them, they need that liquidity. So the price is actually coming down. But if it's just the normal, price in the market, I would say probably wait.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for all your insights. It's lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. The residents of UAE, as you all are aware, we all are working from home, but the businesses hasn't stopped, particularly in many of the Emirates free zones. Free zone authorities have enhanced their already secure digital channels while slashing business fees and rolling out special economic incentives. Next, we have Mr. Sami Mahdi from UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority answering queries related to incentives being offered by the free zone. Welcome, Mr. Sami. Mr. Sami, particularly, how is UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority helping tenants during this period?
Lately, we came up with a new incentives scheme, like a promotion package for new businesses. If our clients will form a company with us for the time being, they will get a license for 15 months instead of 12 months. So this is 3 months extra. And this will give them the opportunity to reduce the costs for the business incorporation during this difficult time, of course. And this will give, for all the other investors who are thinking about setting up a company in this difficult time, it will give us give them some hope of setting up a company with very easy and very cost-effective, costs.
What are the measures, which will be applicable to UAQ free zone member companies? When we talk about license renewal fee, we talk about exemption of rents or reduction in the company setup fee.
Yeah, this will actually, if you get a license for 15 months instead of 12, so this is like a 25% discount in setting up a company. And of course, you'll get a lease if the client will, of course, he will have a business center unit package with the license or a warehouse or a plot of land. So this will give him like 25% discount too. And we even have introduced one more visa eligibility for each company. So this will give clients even a better opportunity to share the costs with of the business incorporation itself. For example, if you have a company of one investor, like one owner, if you have 2 shareholders instead of 1, then this means that you're going to share the costs, and it will reduce the total overall price of the business incorporation. For renewals, now if any company that ever have a license renewal delay fines, then we can waive off these fines in the time being, just to help them start again. And this will even give a boost to their business targets.
Interesting. Another thing was, will UAQ Free Trade Zone Authority, postpone rent payments as announced by some of the government authorities in the UAE?
Well, giving 3 months extra, this means that this will have its own effect on the term of the license itself. So again, as I told you, 25% reduction gives a great help for investors and clients who would like to set up a company with us. And hopefully this will help, of course, during this time. And we're very optimistic about this in the near future.
Interesting. What about we have certain questions which has come online. What about the companies who have already registered in the month of January and they have a full year to go for? So are you offering any compensation or any discounts to those companies who have already registered?
Well, we first of all, we don't have any deposits or guarantees. We don't ask clients, for any deposits or guarantees, unlike some other, of course. Well, especially in this period, you have to be, extend our helping hand to investors. And but for the time being, it's your question was for giving renewals.
No, my question was there will be a lot of companies who would have already, licensed or who would have already renewed their licenses will these companies also be given this benefit, because you are giving these stimulus packages for the companies who have the renewal in March or April or going forward. Yeah. But what about the companies who have already registered in the month of January or December? How about them?
They will, first of all, this one visa eligibility will be helpful for them. But, as you know, they already registered a company. So when they renew the company, if they're absolutely free to renew the company before the 14th of July. So if they renew again, there's no problem with that. They will renew again and they will take the license for 15 months. So they will benefit 3 extra months, which will be very helpful to them in the same time. So, and they're not going to lose any period of the license, for example. So if they renewed, they renewed in January, then they should renew in January 2021. But if they renew now, they won't lose any period in the license plus 15 months. So that will be very helpful for them. Yeah.
Interesting. Lastly, UAQ Free Zone had just announced the new business support plan, you know. So could you highlight some of the key benefits of this support plan? How is this gonna happen? Your existing companies who already have a setup in UAQ Free Trade Zone, or how will this also encourage new companies who are looking at, lower cost of operations to set up businesses in UAQ Free Trade Zone?
Yeah, now we introduced the incentives plan for, as I told you before, 15 months license instead of 12, and 1 more visa eligibility for all license packages. So we believe that this will be giving a huge support for our clients, existing and new clients, in setting up their business during these turbulent times. And we're very optimistic. This situation won't last. Things will get back to normal as soon as possible. And we're seeing good, traffic from inquiries and clients who would like to set up their companies in the UAQ-free zone, given the incentives we offer right now. And we've been always actually very supportive in promoting and helping SMEs in starting their business with us. So we are very optimistic in in this new business support plan, and we hope that the situation will improve as soon as possible.
Sure. For the new business support plan, are you also collaborating with banks, as you rightly mentioned, SMEs? So a lot of SMEs, are you also, tying up with any of the banks to give them guidance to set up the businesses or, assist them in the initial setup?
Well, our clients are free to set up, to open a bank account with any bank in the UAE. Each bank has its own, of course, like KYC and all requirements. We have contacts with, prominent banks in the UAE, and we try to help our clients open a bank account as soon. Well, opening a bank account is not a problem, at all, but each bank has its own requirements, of course. So we give assistance in, we don't guarantee opening a bank account for any client, but the thing is that we give assistance in opening the bank account as soon as possible, so the business can get up and running as fast as we can.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mahdi. We have a lot of questions, for you, which we will come back to you towards the end of this session.
Okay.
As we all are aware that Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization has announced the amended UAE labor laws. We have Mr. Shiraz Shetty here, who will provide us further insight into these labor laws, which are affected by the coronavirus situation. Shiraz, welcome on board. I am quite aware that there are a lot of attendees who are looking forward to hear from you. So, does the new ministerial resolution number 279/2020 issued by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization apply to other free zones?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Poonam, for having me on this morning here in the UAE. A very interesting question because that is something that we get asked a lot by a number of our clients. I think first and foremost is to really go back to what Natalie had said initially, which is basically the fact that the UAE labor law, which is the federal law number 8 of 1980 here in the UAE, still very much applies. And these resolutions that are regularly sort of put out by the Ministerial, by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization are seen as a guidance or a support to the UAE labor law. So I think in relation to your question specifically, this resolution 279 of 2020 has been issued by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, and as such is applicable to all onshore and mainland entities registered with the ministry. So therefore, on a strict interpretation of that, the new resolution does not apply to the free zones. However, in practice, we do see that most free zones do adopt ministerial resolutions from time to time, aside from the DIFC and the ADGM. And for our clients, especially, it is good practice to do so, especially where matters would end up in a dispute and before the labor courts. So it's very important to ensure that you are following the guidance or have, in essence, some form of guidance within your particular free zones. In terms of this particular resolution, I have seen a number of free zones adopt the resolution in whole, but a number of free zones also have not adopted the resolution. We are aware, for example, that some free zones are in discussions to potentially look at bringing out their own guidelines around COVID-19 and the precautionary measures around that. I do a lot of work in the DIFC, and I'm aware that there is a process underway for releasing a presidential directive in relation to COVID-19 measures within that particular free zone. So I think in answer to your question, it really depends which free zone you are in. From a practical perspective, most free zones do adopt the ministerial resolutions, but in this circumstance, given the veracity of the potential changes and the ramifications that potentially could impact employers and employees alike in the various free zones, I think free zones are being very cautious about whether to adopt the ministerial resolution in its current form or to adapt it to and modify it to suit their needs and requirements.
Thank you. Another key concern for us is, can leave without pay be enforced by employers, and for how long? Should employers ask for written communication to document these same?
Look, that's a very good question, and again, something that is on the top of our agenda when speaking to our clients. I think the best advice I can give you in terms of for employers and employees alike is to ensure that a consultation takes place. Sort of taking any kind of steps without any kind of consent is always going to cause some issue or problems later down the line. So the key word here is consultation. If you're an employer, speak to your employees, understand what the issues are, explain to them what concerns you have in relation to the current pandemic, and explain what hardships or difficulties the company may be going through prior to taking any steps. I'm going to focus predominantly on, obviously, the ministerial resolution which has come out. So with that, leave without pay must be agreed by both parties. So you cannot agree to have or put your employees on unpaid leave without having agreed that. And parties who are operating within the mainland and are subject to the ministerial resolution shall sign an addendum which has been issued by the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. And that very clearly stipulates what it is that the employer is proposing in terms of either going on paid leave or unpaid leave, and it's a sort of a box ticking exercise, but that document is to be kept by the employer, a copy to be kept by the employee, and we would recommend also having a third copy, which, whilst it doesn't have to be sent to the ministry, it is advisable to keep that and retain it just in case there is a requirement from the ministry to see a copy of that addendum that has been signed by both parties. Parties operating in other free zones, if they are not applying the ministerial resolution, then in our view and in our guidance, it is basically said that free zones should document such agreement in writing and have both parties sign that document. So you can pretty much take the form of what the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation have as their addendum, and sort of use that format and structure, but tailor it to what your needs and requirements are. That would be sufficient. In terms of the cap on the length of unpaid leave, there is no guidance around that at this present moment in time. Obviously, the situation and the landscape is changing on a daily basis. So we would basically suggest that parties do not exceed a period of 60 days. We've seen a lot of companies put 30 days in, but to be renewed. So they keep this on a renewable basis. That would be our advice in these circumstances. You need to be in a position where you can bring that to an end, so you can terminate that agreement if the pandemic concludes earlier than expected. But given what we're seeing in the news and the reports, and given the lockdown in the UAE, which is also on a renewable basis, our view would be that you have an agreement with your employees to confirm a period, whatever that you may determine, but it be on a renewable basis.
Interesting. In the case of, a temporary salary reduction, this is a very big question which is coming to a lot of minds, because there are a lot of employees who have been working with, organizations for 15 years, 17 years, 20 years, So the key question is, will gratuity be affected? Should employees stress on signing the temporary contract? How will that impact their, final payoffs and all?
It's a very simple point here, and I go back again to Natalie's point that the UAE labour law is the benchmark, and that is what we should be placing reliance upon. From an end of service gratuity perspective, what you've got to remember is the UAE labour law is very clear that it is payable on your final basic salary. So with that in mind, if you are having a temporary salary reduction, so let me give you an example. An individual at the start of this year was on 10,000 dirhams a month, basic salary. During the COVID-19 measures, he or she has been asked to reduce their salary to, let's say, 5,000 dirhams basic salary a month. But then after the COVID-19 pandemic, let's say in July, August of this year, it goes back up to 10,000. That period of where there was a discrepancy within the basic salary should not be impacted, because let's say then the employee is terminated in January 2021 and they are back up to 10,000 dirhams. It is on the 10,000 dirham salary, basic salary, that their end of service gratuity will be calculated. So for all intents and purposes, even in a temporary salary reduction period, your end of service gratuity should not be impacted whatsoever. However, it is our recommendation that if you are signing some sort of an agreement with your employer with regards to the temporary salary reduction, we could add a simple clause which says that your end of service gratuity should not be impacted under any circumstances given the COVID-19 measures.
Interesting. One very pertinent question which is, asked by a lot of people, in an email conversation to us. Can employers dismiss employees because of redundancy without compensation being paid during COVID-19?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked a lot, Poonam. And again, I do refer back to Natalie, who covered this in her introduction. Look, redundancy is not a cause under Article 120 of the Labour Law to terminate an employment of an employee. So therefore, in the strict letter of the law, redundancy is not a valid termination ground. However, compensation shall be paid in those circumstances, except where the employer can prove to the court that they were experiencing financial difficulties which led to the redundancy. And in our view, those sorts of situations are basically where the company cannot operate any longer, has got such financial difficulties that it potentially may have to close down its operations. These are circumstances which the courts would look at in terms of a valid redundancy. So in terms of COVID-19, that even as at this present moment in time has not been declared a valid termination ground. And as such, if the employer can prove to the court that they are experiencing financial difficulties resulting from COVID-19, which leads ultimately to an employee's redundancy, then the court may not grant compensation. But from our perspective, given what the UAE labour law says and given the guidance that we currently have, our view is that a redundancy would still be treated as per the UAE labour law, which is that it's not a valid termination ground.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Shiraz, for these insights. I'm pretty sure, a lot of our queries have been answered by you. We will now move on to the Q&A session. So let me just, because we have got a lot of questions which have been asked. We have Matthew Daria, who is the business editor, Delhi Asset, Abuja, Nigeria. He is asking us, given the increasing spread of the COVID-19 in the UAE and the measures being taken by the authority to curb the spread, when do you think will be appropriate for business to reopen? So Shiraz, would you like to take this question? What are your thoughts on this?
Look, yeah, absolutely happy to. I think, look, the UAE government have done an outstanding job in terms of curbing the spread of COVID-19, albeit that we are still seeing a rise in cases. And I think that's more because there are now more test centers where individuals are being tested for the COVID-19 virus. I think in terms of businesses, look, you have the vital sectors which are still operating, albeit that they need to ensure that they have a letter from their company, stating that they are a vital sector and that they have almost such like a permit, although it's not a permit, and also that they carry their labor card with them. So the vital sectors haven't been impacted as much. In terms of other businesses within the UAE, look, most people, as far as I'm concerned, having spoken to a lot of our clients on a daily basis, are continuing business as usual. However, it's working from home, which is the new norm now. So from our perspective, companies are still, sort of benefiting from sort of business activity. There is still activity that is happening, not only in the UAE but more globally as well. Deals are still being done. Calls are being done via different platforms rather than meetings. So in terms of when businesses are likely to open, our view within DWF is that it is likely going to continue for the foreseeable future, probably through the Ramadan period, and then an assessment will be made by the UAE government authorities as to when to return back to normal. But I don't think any kind of normality will come up or will start immediately. I think there will probably likely be a phased approach coming back into the workplace. So not all employees coming back to the workplace straight away, but sort of having a percentage of employees coming back, so that you don't have too many people all in the same place all at once. I do think public gatherings will still be put on hold for the foreseeable future until we can completely wipe out this virus. So my view is definitely until Ramadan, full lockdown, and then thereafter we shall take a view. But Emirates have also announced that they're going to start opening up their flights again. So there is a move and a shift towards going back to some degree of normality, but it won't be anytime soon.
Thank you, Shiraz. My next question is to Ms. Natalie. We have Osama Omari, who is asking us this question. According to Resolution 279, in case we ask for mandatory annual leave of 2 weeks, let's say, does company needs to get approval of employees, or if it can force it?
For unpaid leave, employers do need to obtain consent from their employees, and I think Shiraz touched upon this as well. So the resolution does not provide that employers can unilaterally impose any terms they want or any measures that they want. What it does say is it sets out the kind of terms that employers are probably looking at, kind of arrangements that are going to be put in place at the minute, and that I know through the queries that I'm getting at the moment, that a lot of employers are looking at such measures as unpaid leave, reductions in salary, etc. But it is not the case that employers can unilaterally impose those on employees. So as Shiraz mentioned, really we're looking for consultation. So where those measures will be introduced, the natural first step should be in all cases to discuss measures with employees. Clearly, if employees are unwilling to agree to, for example, unpaid leave, it may be that talks have to come down to other possibilities, other measures that might have to be imposed, because in all reality, if a company doesn't have any money, if it can't, for cash flow reasons or for any other reasons, it cannot pay employees, and unpaid leave is not acceptable to the employees, there are limited measures which can be taken in the alternative. Companies clearly cannot keep paying cash that they just don't have. So again, I think ultimately it comes back to conversations with employees, getting them involved and being as transparent as possible throughout, so that everyone's working together to the same end goal. But the kind of top and bottom is employees can't be unilaterally placed on unpaid leave.
Interesting. My next question is to Mr. Zulu. Is there any insurance scheme for the employers to deal with pandemic situations to pay the salaries for their employees? If no, is there any chance to introduce in future? This question is asked by Mr. Sunil Kumar.
Thank you so much. A very good question. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that specifically to say, there would be an insurance to pay salaries in case of a pandemic. But what I'm aware of is that there is a general pandemic insurance, and that pandemic insurance will be able to, once you take it, so there'll be premiums that you'll be paying. And once you take that, when you get the claim, it's up to you on how you'll be able to utilize, what the proceeds are from that claim. It is very possible that some of the insurance companies may go to the actual specifics to say you are taking this insurance particularly for this. My advice, though, would be against taking any such insurance, because then you're limiting yourself. Your premiums will only go to one specific item. But if you take a general pandemic insurance, then you are well covered, because anything else that you will be facing during that period, you'll be able to use the claim from the insurance company.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Sami. Sami, we have Sean Gunawardene here, and his question is, by when will the free zones update these amendments? What about the visa expiry situation? Will the same law apply to the free zones, which is announced by the government for the mainland companies? Mr. Mahdi. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I said that all visa regulations and new changes in visas will be applicable, of course, to free zones here, even here in the Umokoin free zone, and because it goes back to the Federal Authority for Nationalization and Identity and Citizenship. So all visa changes will be applicable to free zones as well.
Okay. What about the fees for the new company setups? Is there any reduction in that? That's another question which is asked by Habib Mohabbat.
Reduction in the sense of 25% discount. So the license, as I informed you, will be, instead of 12 months license, it will be for 15 months. So that's equivalent to 25% discount. And one visa eligibility, for example, if it's a license package with one visa eligibility, that will be for 2 with the same cost. So that will be, it will be better for sharing the costs of the business setup itself.
Thank you very much, Sami. Our next question is for Mr. Zulu, which is asked by Mr. Deepak Asha from Kimoha Entrepreneurs Limited. He says that we have seen some of the customers who are in retail business who are delaying the payment, even though we assume their business is sale against cash, credit cards. Is there any measure from the government to force the businesses to pay on time to their vendors? If need be, they can approach their banks to borrow more, if it is justified, but pay their vendors on time.
Well, great. Another very good question, right? I would say that that would be obviously different case by case. So let me, refer back to the TESS, the scheme that I mentioned earlier, the, targeted economic support scheme. One of the requirements in that scheme, as an example, says that, the consumers must be able to, or the customers, because it includes the corporates and the SMEs, must be able to provide some, evidence or documents on how they've been impacted by COVID-19 for them to benefit from the scheme. Now, one of the challenges, obviously, is that people have been impacted differently, and it becomes, a challenge for you to go to the customer and say, give me evidence of how you've been impacted. In some cases, for people who, for example, have lost their jobs, or they have either been put on unpaid leave or salary cut, that one is easy to prove. But for businesses, it becomes difficult, because in some cases, they still, if you look at the bank statements, they were still getting payments and the cash flow from the previous business that they did in the previous months. Now, going forward, they will not be getting those inflows anymore. Ideally, they have been impacted, even though they are not able to prove. And in some cases, we have also seen cases where their suppliers have been impacted, or their customers have been impacted, or the entire industry has been impacted. So to actually just put everyone in the same boat and say, look, I don't see how you've been impacted, and therefore I cannot be able to give you relief, it becomes a challenge until you have a one-on-one discussion with each one of those businesses. So if you have your customers that are not paying you today, it's very hopeful the banks are doing that today, to sit down with them, understand why they're not able to pay, and they can be getting cash in their bank accounts today, but what other liabilities do they have? And if they pay for all of those, how would they be sustainable going forward? The reality is today, even the ones that feel that have not been impacted, I would be able to argue to say everyone has been impacted, either directly or indirectly. And if you are not being impacted today, with where we are going, we can see that in the next 2-3 months, everybody will feel being impacted. There are a lot of companies today that are already cutting and announcing the variable incentives because they will not be able to pay. So people's bonuses are already being cut. So you might not be receiving a bonus today. The bonus that you're supposed to receive at the end of the year might not be the same because all of those decisions are being made. So there might be a lag effect, but it's very safe to work on the premise that everybody has been impacted.
Thank you, Sami, for these insights. Shiraz, we will take one last question for you, and one for Natalie as well. There was a news in the Indian media that private companies in UAE is planning to taking only a fixed percentage of employees from other countries. Can you please clarify on this?
Yeah, there was a news report that came out, I think yesterday or the day before, with regards to a limitation on the percentage of certain countries' employees coming into the UAE. As far as I'm aware, we've not got any further clarification on this point in terms of who those companies, who those sort of countries or territories or jurisdictions are at this stage. We are looking to find out, and we will put a circular out. But at this stage, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any countries listed or provided for. So cannot give you any further information on that.
Thank you. Natalie, one question to you, and this was a question rather I was waiting all through from a lot of people. In case there is a the employee doesn't want to sign the agreement for the unpaid leave or for going on leave without pay. So how can we tackle such a situation?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it's a good question. It's one that is coming up a lot, and I think there's very few options that are ideal, of course, because if a company, as I mentioned earlier, if a company has no cash flow, cannot continue to pay employees, of course, they realistically, unpaid leave is probably the only option, save termination of employment, unfortunately. So I think, again, it goes back to what I was saying before in the context of unpaid leave, which is all about consultation. Ultimately, if employees are presented with clear information that goes to, the business cannot sustain your employment or paid employment for the time being, we do see this matter resolving, or we do see things changing going forward. And it's very clear, open communication like that, often you can get employee buy-in because they understand what's going on. But ultimately, it's a commercial decision. If employers refuse to cooperate and you can't get the unpaid leave through legitimately, it's a question of whether to proceed in any event. Clearly not a compliant approach and therefore not advisable, but it is an option, or the alternative is looking at other measures, such as, for example, termination of employment. Again, just to be clear, that's not a valid reason for dismissal. I know Shiraz touched upon earlier the valid reasons for dismissal. It would not be a valid reason for dismissal to rely on the employee's refusal to cooperate with unpaid leave, of course. But again, it goes back to, if there's no money and the employees can't be paid, unfortunately, it's a question of which option to take. And again, it's a commercial decision for the company, having regard to matters such as how quickly they see things turning around for them. Is this going to be a long-term thing or not? Are employees or the employees who are refusing to cooperate, are they people that are going to be needed quickly when the current circumstances turn? If so, obviously, you might be more lenient and more, you might try to address matters more with those employees than perhaps others who you could potentially or would potentially impact the business less. But again, ultimately, it's a commercial decision. And I should touch upon, I saw in the comments that the question we talked about earlier, there was a question relating to paid leave. And I think we talked about it on the basis that it was unpaid. Just to be clear, if we're talking about paid absence, the labour law does give employers the right to determine annual leave in no more than 2 periods. So the resolution does refer to leave, but in terms of getting employee consent, we're talking about unpaid leave. When we are talking about putting employees on paid leave, the employer does have the right to dictate the days. But again, I think on a practical point, employees and employers should be discussing those matters from a personnel management perspective. Clearly, it's better to have a happy workforce. And so if you can get employee buy-in even for paid leave, then it's worth doing that.
I agree with you. You know, this is a matter where, you know, all of us have to be very, very considerate about each other's needs, whether it is employers, employees, you know, or the external vendors or suppliers. So we have still a lot of questions, but we are running short of time. So I thank you very much, Natalie, Mr. Zulu, Mr. Mahdi, and Mr. Sethi for your competent insights. I'm sure it has been of great value to all of us. We will be having the second edition of the same webinar on the different topics on April 21st. And probably, you know, we will be able to take more questions during the second edition. Our special gratitude to Queen Free Trade Zone for powering today's webinar, and big thanks to all the attendees for sparing time and joining us today for today's webcast. I hope in these pandemic time, you all keep safe and healthy during these challenging times. We all are here for each other, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siraj. Thank you, Sunny.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Nat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.